everyone, and welcome to Transistance, your transgender news commentary show here on the Transverse. I am one of your hosts, Emily.
And I am Jeannie V, or Genevieve, and I am going to be doing things a little differently tonight. I was sharing with Emily right before we got ready to prep the show that I'm dealing with a bit of an anxiety attack tonight, and you will also notice that Marla is not here tonight. And those two things really go hand in hand. Marla and I have both been very much emotionally drawn out from events over the weekend. And we are both running a little bit thin right now. Marla is very much in a place where she needed to take the night off. I, on the other hand, I knew that the messages that needed to go out tonight needed to be gotten out. So if I'm a little bit slower on communicating tonight, or if I seem to have problems forming words, like right now, I'm talking a lot slower than I normally do. Now, the adrenaline may kick in, I don't know. But due to my anxiety, things slow down. So bear with me tonight as I kind of do my best to get through this episode tonight.
Thank you, Jeannie. And I know that at some point later in the show, we will talk a little bit more about that and bring some awareness to what's been going on, because I think it's important to talk about, and hopefully it'll help a little bit with what you're going through to talk about it. Let's go ahead and jump in then. First off, we have Texas, of course. There's a lot going on there. Texas officials investigate family for child abuse just because they have a trans daughter. This is what Greg Abbott was asking for. What's going on here as we dive deeper into this one, Jeannie?
Exactly. We have a sort of an expanded coverage of what's been happening in Texas. So we talked last week about Greg Abbott, who is the governor of Texas, issuing an order to the Department of Family Protective Services, whatever it is. Basically, it's Child Protective Services in Texas. And basically telling them that they had to investigate any family that was allowing their child to undergo gender affirming treatments for child abuse. The Attorney General, Ken Paxton, the Governor, Greg Abbott, and the Director of the department are all in agreement on this order. And what this story is about, that you touched on, Emily, is the first family that was investigated for providing their 16-year-old child transgender affirming care. Now, here's the kicker of this. The parent who is being investigated is actually an employee of the Department of Family and Protective Services, meaning that she is being investigated by her own company, her own business. So when we talked about last week that this is not about the law, Greg Abbott can't support this law. He can't enforce the things that he's talking about. But what he has done has effectively put the families of transgender children in a target. And luckily, the ACLU and Lambda Legal jumped in as quickly as possible. They took up the case of this first family. I do know that as of last week, there were at least 5 incidents of a family with transgender kids being investigated. But ACLU and Lambda Legal stepped in to block the investigation of parents, and a judge did grant that injunction. So parents could not be investigated, but they were still being investigated. And as quickly as the decision came down, the Texas Attorney General, Ken Paxton, who started this ball rolling, immediately appealed the judge's decision to try to get that injunction overturned so that they can go back to investigating families. To add insult to injury, over the weekend, Texas Children's Hospital in Houston released a statement that says that they will no longer provide hormone therapy for transgender children patients. According to the statement, this step was taken to safeguard our healthcare professionals and impacted families from potential criminal legal ramifications. What that effectively said was the hospital would rather not deal with legal issues, so we are not going to treat transgender children. So they put their financial matters ahead of the lives of children. So Texas, right now, if you live in Texas, please be yelling at people. Yell at your local representatives, your local senators, yell at your city councils and your school boards. Yell. This is not the time for civil discourse. This is a time to make our voices heard. It is a time to basically yell as loud as the other side is, because the other side is yelling. They're yelling, they do not care.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that they're yelling that they're against us. They're going the way of they had a lot of success with abortion, right? So you outlaw abortion as much as you can. You make abortion as bad of a thing as you can, and force it to be its own thing. So you have to go to an abortion clinic to get that done, and then you just
Right.
keep putting the pressure on until you force those places out of business. You make it so that the regular care facilities, hospitals and things like that don't touch it because they're worried about affecting their ability to help and serve the greater community.
Right.
And so you get them to isolate it, and then once it's isolated, then you just keep attacking until you find these ways to make it illegal. And as you pointed out beforehand, we talked, and I was bringing up again the thought of, like, the demonization, the boogeyman of trans adult women is, of course, that they're just men who are trying to skis on women and trying to rape them in bathrooms. That's the
Right.
Overarching narrative. And then I ask, well, then where's the logic in attacking trans kids? And you brought up several key points of their side from the research that you've done into this. What are some of those things that you found there?
So, first of all, the most obvious reason, this is not a logic thing. This is not about what is rational or logical or even based in science. We have a hospital in Texas that only takes care of children say we are not going to perform American Medical Association, American Psychiatric Association, and American Academy of Pediatrics agreed upon and approved treatment. We know that 40% increase in survivability of transgender kids if they have gender affirming procedures. Okay? So Emily had asked me, what is the logic of attacking kids? The least among us. The logic of it is not logical, but it is something that we have seen throughout history. This is being pushed by a radical conservative Christian cabal of political action groups. It is a band of 4 majors that I have been able to locate so far, and a lot of regional or local ones. But the logic that they are following is this: let's make us the last generation of transgender people. The reality is, this is the same technique that was used on reservations with indigenous people throughout the 20th century. They would take children from their families, put them in residential schools, force them to dress as white children, force them to speak English, and prohibit them from speaking their own language. They would ensure that the traditions of their people's spirituality were not observed, and that they forced Christian principles on these children. And we are just now learning the repercussions of residential schools, but this is the same quote unquote logic. The idea is, if we take transgender children who have been led to believe that they are transgender, and that is the point, the argument is that transgender adults are pushing a narrative that is then being forced into these children's lives from the outside. But the logic that they're following is that if we can take the children out of these abusive situations where they are having ideologies forced upon them, then we can educate them and we can put them in loving homes that will tell them about who they really are and help them grow in that identity. That's the logic. And it's been the logic for millennia.
That sounds very dangerous and very scary for reality, basically. The thing that you know, again, you're talking about the logic they're using, and the thing that's scariest about this is there isn't any real logic behind it, because if the narrative is that it's the existent adult transgender folks that are pushing this narrative that is somehow getting to the kids, why would parents who aren't transgender then force it on their kids? Like, that's the bit where there's a really strange leap happening of, you know, putting this on the parents.
Right.
And of course, you know, the basis of this is it just ignores the fact of being transgender entirely. But yeah, it's just that leap from, okay, it's the current transgender adult population that is causing these kids to become trans, but there's the parents in between, and they're attacking the parents for forcing the kids to do this when the parents aren't trans. So it's just like, don't you see how that doesn't add up?
Well, and again, this is a point where it's not a matter of direct correlation. It's a matter of indirect influence. Transgender people are in the media. Transgender people are in the news. We are in many places because the pandemic has allowed us to emerge and own our identity. But because we have seen such a growth in visibility, now the conservative side believes that we are basically just an ideology that is being pushed into media by a group of mentally ill people, because that's the narrative they follow. Transgender people are mentally ill. They inflate the definition of gender dysphoria to mean that basically we can't think clearly. But because we are pushing this ideology based in a mental illness, we are influencing parents to force their children to become transgender.
Mentally flawed. pot, I'd like you to meet kettle. Jesus.
Well, let me go one step further and really fuck with your brain on this.
Ah, good. Let's go.
There are a couple of different organizations that I'm currently working on exposing how they are driving this narrative of anti-transgender sentiment. All of them declare that they are supportive and fight for the rights of families over government entities or anyone else like schools taking away parental rights of their children in how they are educated. At the same time, they are doing exactly the opposite. They are taking away parents' rights to actually get their children the care that is needed to give them a better shot at surviving.
Yeah, and where I get lost is how that voice against this is so much louder than the voice of the kids. That one sort of makes sense. The parents, this is where you lose me, and the doctors. You have parents who quote unquote know better, and you have doctors who have the scientific and medical knowledge and the standards they're held to. And I just don't get how you take those three things and negate them entirely for your own narrative against that.
Let me introduce you to the book that tells us about the God who rules all, including the world of science, and tells us how to behave. That's how they get past that.
But that's particularly untrue.
It is God who has dictated to them what they are supposed to do. It is God who has granted the church the authority to influence governments around the world and throughout history. It is God who says and tells people how they should raise their children through the voice of the church.
So human rights are a fallacy. It's all God's will, and that's all we should care about.
You have just broken the great theological conundrum of so many people. There is an argument within the church over free will and whether or not we have free will. And you have just clearly stated why that argument of free will is now completely eroded. I want to grant you an honorary doctorate of the Theological School of Genie because you have shown such great aptitude in clarifying a perfectly fucked up theology.
Well, and it's great too because now I can just blow up more skirts with this, because if there's no free will, if it's God's will, then God made us trans. Like, there is your biggest argument for the truth of the existence of transgender people.
See,
do I drop my mic now?
No, you can't quite drop it yet there, Em. Because you see, God didn't make us this way. Satan did.
Cool. Shall we move? Shall we move much further north for just a quick story?
This is a very quick story.
Idaho bill would make it a felony to give minors transition-related care. Here we go again, but in a state far away.
Idaho is following suit of a couple of other states, but they have upped the ante. Let's see. If approved, the legislation would make it a felony, punishable by up to life in prison, to perform gender-affirming surgery, provide puberty-blocking medication or cross-sex hormones, or remove any otherwise healthy or non-diseased body part or tissue.
Felony, isn't a felony a federal crime, or are those separate?
No,
Okay.
it's the severe degree of crime.
Mm-hmm.
A misdemeanor is a lower degree of crime. Usually, maximum you're going to get maybe a couple of years in jail and a huge fine and probably some type of, community re-education. A felony, on the other hand, can be a lengthy prison sentence, or it's reserved for the most
Yeah.
heinous of societal crimes. In this case, a doctor, if they provided these gender affirming procedures, could be found guilty and punished to a life in prison for, again, doing their job.
So let me throw something out there that's going to be a bit inflammatory, but hopefully is a bit optimistic. I came out late 30s. And there are some aspects of that that are kind of a bitch, I'm going through a second puberty. The body that I most want, that I most identify inside, is not what I'm going to get on the outside, at least not with extensive surgery, which I can't afford, of course. But I'm in a really good place. There's a lot of stuff going on right now against trans kids. Is there some optimism to be held in the fact that even if they're forced to wait until they're 18, that there is still some hope there?
There's always hope, Emily, and thank you for bringing us back to that. You were in your 30s. I was turning 50 when I came out. What we are seeing right now is hope, because it is a fight. That's where we hold on to that. That is where we keep our hope, because we have to fight. We have to be seen. We have to have our voices heard. Our younger generations are much better equipped to do this, because they are angry because of what is happening. And I don't think enough of us are angry because we're comfortable. We love our privilege. We love the ability that we can retreat back into our homes and not have to worry about, we can do all of our shopping on Amazon and
Mm-hmm.
have our groceries delivered and work from home, and we don't have to deal with the outside world. But we have to get angry, because this is turning into a worst case scenario, a perfect storm of an effort to eradicate transgender people. And I know that you all think that I'm probably off my nut, and that's okay. I've got plenty of doctor's notes that agree with you on that. But when it comes to what is happening right now, I am not stressing the truth when I say that these are the same tactics used to try to eradicate and assimilate the indigenous peoples of this land throughout the 20th century. We have uncovered what they did with indigenous people, and now they are targeting us.
So as a trans person, if you get a blanket in the mail from the government, we should make sure not to use that.
Well, if you haven't been vaccinated against smallpox, you need to go get vaccinated against smallpox. That's how you keep that from happening. But let me just put this into perspective, y'all. I'm a historian. This is part of what I know how to do with my life. When the white expansion movement moved across the Great Plains, indigenous peoples were demonized, they were dehumanized, they were made to look like savages, which is why that's a word we don't appropriate to talk about high school athletics anymore. They were considered to be a more primitive people who were basically just warlike and had nothing to offer society. And so, as they dehumanized indigenous peoples, it became much easier to do things like seize their land, seize their property, put them into a place where they could be controlled, the reservation movement. The way that indigenous peoples were treated in the 1800s is exactly the same way that Japanese immigrants and Japanese Americans and American Japanese who were put into concentration camps during World War II were handled. Those families had their homes seized, they had their businesses seized, they had all of their belongings left behind. They were allowed to bring 2 suitcases, and they were loaded on trains, moved away from the coast areas into desolate lands, and they were put behind wire to basically live out the existence of World War II because they could not be trusted. And if you know anything about the dehumanization of the Japanese people during World War II, you know that that was the first step. So now we see them using the concepts of what was done to indigenous people, indigenous children, and they are taking that playbook and they are laying it right here in the 21st century.
Mm-hmm. One side note I like to add to this, based on what I'd heard on NPR, is the comment on this, that what it's doing is it's putting children at risk. And I'm not even talking about trans children. I'm talking about the people, the kids that are at risk, that are in the Department of Family Protective Services in Texas, the ones that are in abusive families or are in real danger. Now, this is going to flood that system and take real care away from the people that really need it.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I agree completely with that statement. It's the child welfare program in Texas is already one of the most abhorrently bad ones in the United States. It was already messed up to a degree that people were calling for reforms years ago. But now they have added a layer of horror to what's going to happen. And so, yeah, it's definitely going to cause problems within the entire system.
Well, we've seen a lot recently about dehumanization of peoples. You know, like you're talking about that historical example of the 50s, and then even further back with what they did to the indigenous population, which actually that would have been the 40s for World War II, and then the indoctrination of natives would have actually been later, would have been the 50s, right?
Well, we had residential schools being opened and populated up into the 80s.
Oh, okay. And then we've got recent examples, though. The immigrants that were coming in and the horrible treatment of them, just the complete lack of care for, human condition.
Yeah.
Just what the horrible conditions they put them in. Do you feel that we are moving towards a spot of them trying to push towards rounding up trans people?
Not yet. There has to be a few more freedoms removed from us before they can do that. But I will say this: is it possible to make our life more uncomfortable? Yes. It is legally possible right now to make the lives of transgender people more uncomfortable, legally.
Yeah. Oh, and we've seen all you got to do is talk about it and demonize us, and then people take it into their own hands. You see the death rates rise.
It goes even farther than that, because there are a significant number of states that do not have discrimination protections for transgender people. We can lose our jobs, we can lose our homes, we can be denied certain services just because of being transgender people. there are plenty of states that have no protections whatsoever for transgender people. So, yes, it is very possible that we can have our lives made more miserable by these people. But once again, the hope is in the fight. Or, as a friend of mine has taught me to say, the obstacle is the way. We have to tackle this head on.
Mm-hmm.
We have to confront this head on.
The obstacle is the way. That is very deep. I really appreciate that. Let's talk now about kind of the greater opinion of the country in this and our other leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Joe Biden urges Republicans and Democrats to pass Equality Act amid onslaught of anti-trans bills. What is this one, and what teeth does it really have?
So this is actually from the State of the Union address, and before the gathered political representation of the United States at the federal level, I mean, this is the State of the Union in a joint session of Congress with the Supreme Court in residence there. Joe Biden was very affirming and sort of aggressively stepping out and saying, that transgender people are recognized, that trans kids are remembered, and that he's got their back. But one of the greatest tools right now to bolster the community is the Equality Act. The Equality Act is an expansion of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. It would allow protection for LGBT plus people. It would, it would knock out 90, if not 100%, of all of the legislation that is currently being brought forward. It would eliminate the teeth of every one of those so that they could not be enacted in any way, shape, or form. But there is such resistance to this bill that it is locked in the Senate. It has passed the House of Representatives, but the Senate has not passed it. And President Biden said during the State of the Union that if we're going to protect trans kids from being targeted, then this Equality Act has to be passed.
How many of the people that he's pleading with to ask them to protect trans kids are on the side of feeling that trans kids shouldn't be trans, though? That's the big question.
Too many. You have voices like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who loves to just stand up and talk about how horrible transgender people are, how predatory and how monstrous we are. And even though she represents one of the lowest levels of intelligent public speaking, people still listen to her and they give her credence and they follow along with what she says. So there are too many people who follow along with that. Now, as a counterpoint, Pose actor and trans activist Angelica Ross accused the Biden administration of doing the bare minimum, basically saying that, yeah, the State of the Union had a great amount of rhetoric, but said that, we are now in a time of, according to Ms. Ross, we are living through a moment of unprecedented loss, financial hardship, and socio-political discord. We know these issues disproportionately impact the most marginalized among us, so we need our leaders to be doing more to protect our LGBTQ plus community, but most particularly our Black trans sisters and siblings. Agreed. 100%. She is right on. She goes on to say, it's time for people to have an honest and intersectional conversation centering on the most vulnerable against us, and that the president should be doing that. The president should be talking about that. This should be in every press release. This should be in every press gathering. This should be something that this is something that is a threat to a marginalized group of people. This is a clear and present danger for a group of Americans under the watch of President Joe Biden. So it's not too far removed to basically say, get everybody you know to start writing letters, sending emails, calling the politicians' offices and clogging up their voicemails, telling them that this is unacceptable, that this is a tragedy of epic proportions. Now, one of the beautiful things that President Biden did was that Sonny Bryant was invited to be a guest of the president for the State of the Union. Sonny Bryant is the 8-year-old transgender girl from Texas who basically stared down the Senate and told them what this stuff would do to her. And she just wanted to know why they wanted to take those things away from her. At 8 years old, she was sitting before the Texas Senate demanding accountability. Flip side of that, we go back to Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, who came out and said that it is shocking and sad that Joe Biden would champion cruel forms of child abuse, such as genital mutilation through forced so-called sex change operations and the prescription of dangerous puberty blockers. I will always defend the children of Texas from these inhumane procedures.
Where in the actual hell are they getting the word forced from when you're hearing from trans kids? This is just absolute lunacy.
It is. It is absolute lunacy. It is by the nature of the rhetoric that they are receiving that it is the idea of coercion. It is the idea of manipulation. It is the idea of brainwashing. These children cannot, in any way, shape, or form, in their mind, form enough rational thought to understand their gender, even in their late teenage years. The voices who are denouncing this say that, look, we probably should ban this up through the 20s because we know that the brain does not completely develop until 25 to 30. And so I can almost see that there will be recommendations coming to the AMA and the APA that says that gender affirming procedures should not be allowed in cases of people who are under 40. I can see that coming to those respective boards. So when it says things like forced, it is the idea that liberal psychiatrists, psychologists did the same thing that Marla did. Psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists, hormone endocrinologists, surgeons, all of these liberal doctory types are forcing this idea on this child because that child cannot think that way.
And how dare they, because they want the Christian-y types to be able to tell those kids what to think.
Exactly.
How dare those liberals?
Yep. Because we all know that there is only one God and that there is only one way to look at the world, and that is through the definitions and the interpretations of that group's particular translation of that book and how they apply it. So, yeah, we're out here living under borrowed freedom because eventually that freedom will be taken away from us. So they have every right to take it away from us before then. But I will come back and say this. President Biden, basically came out and said, get your shit together, Abbott. Biden labeled the anti-trans campaign government overreach at its worst, adding that Abbott's actions have terrified families across the state. Like so many anti-transgender attacks proliferating in states across the country, the governor's actions callously threaten to harm children and their families just to score political points. These actions are terrifying many families in Texas and beyond, and they must stop. That is our president telling the governor of Texas, get it together, man.
And they're just going to go back on there. Oh, those crazy liberals that want to control your life.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, they're doing everything they can to control it. Oh, wow. Do we get to move on from that now?
Moving right along, dig-a-dung, dig-a-dung.
Let's jump across the pond real quick, shall we?
Absolutely.
The Scottish government introduces gender recognition reforms. Are these good reforms? What are the reforms here?
Okay, so let me just say this right up front. If you are going to go across the Atlantic to anywhere of the lands of the Northern Europeans, Scotland is one of the best places to go for transgender people. The Scottish government has brought forward legislation that would simplify how a person could change their legal gender. And it would remove the necessity for a medical report, a psychiatric report. It would reduce the waiting time from 2 years to 3 months. And it would allow 16 and 17-year-olds to apply. If we're going to go anywhere, let's go to Scotland.
I haven't been. Let's do it. I'm excited.
Because we can at least change our gender and drink some scotch.
There you go. I'm for it. Let's do it. Now, it's really good to hear about the places that are like working in the correct direction and putting together some legislation and some ideas that are logical, that make some kind of sense, as opposed to what we've got going on here. This just abject craziness.
Yeah. Project craziness. That's a good word for it.
Well, as we talk about craziness, let's move to some of our crazier states. Surprising that Texas, with all of that, isn't the craziest.
Oh no.
Your home and native land of Oklahoma is advancing a bill that would criminalize school librarians over LGBTQ books. That sounds.
I talked about this one a few weeks back. The Oklahoma Senate Education Committee passed a bill to ban books that are LGBTQ related or that include LGBTQ inclusive sex education, and it is headed to the Senate floor. First of all, what this will do is that it will remove any sex education curriculum from the schools. And that means that sex education happens in one of two ways. One, the church, where it doesn't happen. Or two, really bad locker room talk. And so schools are removing the ability to give youth and children comprehensive and healthy sexual information, and going so far just to make sure that the lesbians and the gays and the transgender peoples don't influence our children. They are willing to institute a $10,000 a day fine, and that school officials or librarians who refuse to do this would be barred from working in any school for 2 years. So, yeah, we talked about this bill, but it is advancing. This is in conjunction with a different bill.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there's another bill that would penalize teachers $10,000 if they teach something that goes against a student's religious beliefs.
Yeah, we talked about that one.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Also, with another one, which would ban LGBTQ books as well as any books that talk about recreational sexualization or books that discuss non-procreative sex.
Mm-hmm. Because
But
these
that's in
because
addition to
these
other bills.
these political folks, because they've never had non-procreative sex.
Right. Yeah. We're going to get to that in just a bit. So this is different from 2 other bills that would bar teachers from teaching for 5 years. So there are efforts to change that. These bills are part, and this is from the same article, these bills are part of a coordinated effort by Republicans known as the No Promo Homo laws.
Wait, but I thought they were removing all all sex education. Yeah, it's another one of those things where they're going to lump trans and gay education, not even education, just talking about it in general, in with this, so that they can eradicate it entirely, which is what they've been trying to do for a very long time, and try and force on this idea that's been proven very bad, that abstinence is the only way.
So the flaw in their entire argument.
Is there only one? Please continue.
Oh, no. This is the flaw in their argument. They want to ban any books or material that have non-procreative sex in them. There's only 1 or 2 incidents of procreative sex in the Bible. The rest of them are non-procreative, which means the Bible would not be allowed in a school. And so if a teacher brought a Bible to school, that teacher would be fined $10,000.
Oh my God, can we do it?
Material into school property.
Can we find a teacher that's backing this very vocally and do that? That would be amazing. Please.
So let's take this one step further. If anybody reads from a Bible at a school function, you get to hold the school function accountable for $10,000 because it's a public event. So, if you happen to be in a state that is trying to remove certain things like books that talk about sex that is not procreative, you make sure that the Bible is on every one of those goddamned lists.
Wonderful. I love it. Speaking of states that are doing strange things and trying to ban certain things, let's move over to Texas's neighbor, Florida. Florida's ignore the poor geography there. Florida's Don't Say Gay bill just got another step closer to becoming law. Here's another one to just laugh up one side and down the other about what's going on here, Jeannie.
So the Don't Say Gay bill is the Florida legislation that will prohibit the discussion of any LGBTQ it would prohibit any conversations about LGBTQ material in schools, and it would allow parents to sue the school for failing to follow up on these rules. And so, it just moves this one step further down the line. So this is what one of the senators had to say about this. Senator Dennis Baxley, who sponsors the Senate version of the bill, claimed it is not anti-LGBTQ and that he doesn't hate anyone. This does one simple thing. It decides who's in charge. I'm not trying to demonize anybody. I'm not trying to negate the values of teachers. I'm just trying to come back to center point. Parents must be in charge of these decisions. Students, of course, took that in a totally different way and decided to protest in their own fashions. And one Florida student began to hand out pride flags in protest. And the student was suspended until further notice, pending an investigation. There was a protest basically, that just denounced it at the school, and they were doing walkouts all over Florida at the same time. But this individual was called into the office and was told that he was being disrespectful and openly advocating against the staff, and so they suspended him from campus until further notice.
Wow.
Again, that's part of the Florida student walkout, and I think there was another one planned. There's another event planned tomorrow in Florida. But the thing is that when you step back and you look at the rhetoric, the things that are being said, that's how you determine where their brains are. This is how you determine where the conservative brain is, the anti-trans brain is. The press secretary for the Florida governor, Ron DeSantis, tweeted this statement. If you're against the Don't Say Gay bill, okay? This is what she said, though, in the tweet. If you're against the anti-grooming bill, you are probably a groomer, or at least you don't denounce the grooming of 4 to 8-year-old children. Silence is complicity. This is how it works, Democrats, and I didn't make the rules. You have a press secretary of the governor of Florida basically saying that if you want freedom of speech enabled for children to be able to talk about subjects that are pertinent in the conversation of society right now, you put in place a law, and then you say, if you don't like that law, you are a groomer, somebody potentially moving toward an act of sexual impropriety with a minor, specifically a 4 to 8-year-old. If you make it make sense, you're not going to.
Yeah.
You are not going to make it make sense. This bill is known as the Parental Rights in Education Bill. It says teachers cannot encourage classroom discussion about sexual orientation or gender identity in primary grade levels or in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students.
Has this been brought to the attention of people as being rampant, that they're teaching kids at wildly inappropriate ages?
Again, Emily, we are talking about it is being fed to our kids. In fact, there is another article where Ron DeSantis said that gender ideology is being injected into education.
We're talking about Texas again.
Uh-huh. This is a good one.
I just when I think I'm out, they pull me back in, I guess. Students say, I'm gonna say it because it's an adult program. Fuck you, fascist, and shut down talk by transphobic Texas candidate. What is going on here? And hallelujah.
So, at the University of North Texas last week, Republican candidate for state representative Jeff Younger had been invited by the Young Conservatives of Texas to speak at the University of North Texas. When he was speaking, the students in the classroom, and it was sort of an auditorium style classroom with, the desks that are in the half moon type shapes, the students began slapping their desk in rhythm and saying, "Fuck these fascists," as loud as they could. And Jeff Younger had to end his talk prematurely because the students became so loud, he had no chance to speak over them. Now, here's something that needs to be read into this because this has a direct connection to transgender issues. Younger launched his campaign because he proudly announced that he tried to stop his own daughter from transitioning. A judge had awarded his ex-wife full custody, and he began a conservative media blitz, dragging his wife and daughter into the public, saying that he wanted to keep her from transitioning. His website says that he supports conversion therapy for transgender youth, opposes gender affirming medical care, and opposes school recognizing the gender identities of trans students. So when the University of North Texas class encountered this wonderful piece of humanity, they let their voices be heard. In response to that, Younger tweeted out that the protesters were communists and that trans people do not exist, which means he basically told the entire fucking world that his daughter does not exist.
I love this whole thing. Like, God, they're just so crazy that if you call them a fascist for doing fascist things, you're a communist. When it's like, this is sort of the whole basis and framework of democracy, actually. So yeah.
Yeah.
Ugh. It's great. People are wonderfully insane. Ah, you got to laugh at them to keep from crying. Okay.
The world is wackadoodle.
Another very editorialized headline, but let's jump into it anyways. A crusty GOP candidate wants to resurrect Trump's dumb trans military ban because of bedwetting.
Yep.
I'm going to assume this is one of those very typical things where someone in the Republican Party accuses someone else of something that they do regularly. Please tell me this is one of those cases.
No. It is exactly what it says. Mitchell Swan is a retired military colonel and a Republican running for a House seat in Georgia. He wants the transgender military ban reinstated because, as he says, many individuals with certain conditions, such as bedwetting and sleepwalking, are disqualified from military service. They are not disqualified because they are bad people, but because these symptoms are considered mental and emotional issues that are not conducive to combat environments. Gender dysphoria is no different and should be treated the same. That it is not conducive to enhancing military performance and unit morale. So, this amazing psychological genius has made the declaration because of his insights into the world of psychiatric and psychological understanding that gender dysphoria is just like bedwetting and sleepwalking. We're not bad people. We're just really, really not good to be around.
I just love that comment that, it's so contrary to, the health of the unit and all of that. And it's just like, uh, this is again ignoring and negating the fact that trans people have served in the military for generations, hundreds of
Mm-hmm.
years. Um,
Yep.
yeah, I love that these people really show their cards and show their complete and utter lack of education when they start
Oh,
talking in terms that suggest that trans people are new. We're
right.
new to the planet here.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, you don't know anything at all
Oh, no.
of
And they don't
reality or
care.
fact. No, they don't care. They don't care. And that's the sad thing. Again, going back to that they can push a religious agenda and feel like that is righteous and the right thing to do, and ignore all of medical and medical science
Yeah.
reality. They can just manufacture their own, based on a book that they interpret their own,
Mhm.
and they feel that this is the correct thinking, and that thinking contrary to that is the problem. It's just very,
Right.
very strange, warped logic.
Yeah. And again, logic is not required.
Hmm. Yeah, I keep using the wrong word there, don't I? Let's move on somewhere completely different now. Let's go north again. Montana House candidate Zoe Zephyr is ready to fight for the trans community. Let's go, girl. What's going on here?
Yeah. Zoe Zephyr had come before the Montana legislature to basically speak on the anti-trans sports bills that Montana was considering at that time. And after participating in that, got a taste for how she could be a part of making a bigger change. Um, she told LGBTQ Nation that asking the people in that room to see your humanity and to care about the issues that were hurting your community, and to have to speak to a legislature that did not want to listen when it came to human rights was hard. But she decided to go one step further and say, now I'm going to put myself in the place where maybe I can be a voice. She's running for the Montana House and could be the first transgender person ever elected to the state legislature. She said that the core fire at the center of my heart is my trans community, my queer community, and seeing the way the legislature was harming them, from the trans sports ban to attempted bans on healthcare for trans youth to limitations on updating your birth certificate. If we don't have people in the room trying to stop it, we'll never be able to move the needle on this stuff. If we don't have people in the room.
Yeah,
We've got to
that's
make it.
how a lot of stuff actually happens. How a lot of things are changed. If you don't have the representation, if you don't have a voice in the room, if you don't have a direct advocate with the experience and the knowledge there, it's
Yeah.
very difficult for things to change. I
Yeah,
love to see
it
this.
is.
I love to see this advocacy and the people not only standing up and fighting, but actually, trying to become part of it and make the change from the inside. I love it.
Right.
Jumping around the country a little bit more, and we're going to bounce primarily around the U.S. apparently. Let's go ahead and hop down to Utah and see what's going on there. Utah legislature passes anti-trans bill. Republican governor vows to veto. Let's go, governor.
Yeah, this is very interesting. So this was a transgender exclusionary sports bill that passed by the legislatures and was now going to be going to the desk of the governor. Interesting side note. Governor Spencer Cox of Utah is a Republican, and he has vowed to veto this bill. Um, the the bill is one of those things that is, it's trying to differentiate itself from all the ones that have not made it so far. But this would set up a commission to determine a trans student athlete's eligibility to compete under their gender identity. And right at the end, as they were about to wrap the session, Senator Dan McKay proposed new language saying that no student of the male sex, as determined by individuals' genetics and anatomy at birth, could participate in girls' interscholastic sports in public schools, therefore excluding trans girls from girls' sports, of course. Both the House and the Senate then, passed the revisions, but it still passed through the House. And the governor has said, I thought we had at least the bones of a deal, and then this whole idea of a complete ban that we had never talked about it entered. It was never debated. It just came up at the very last minute. So basically, the governor feels like that the Republicans had acted in bad faith, that they had introduced language that had not been negotiated. And yes, let's be honest, this is how shit gets done. You know, there has to be negotiations. There has to be give and take. But when it finally got down to the floor to be voted on, somebody changed the wording to something that wasn't agreed upon. It passed by the Republican-led legislature. And so the governor says, no, I'm not doing this. I'm not going to do this. So
it's not the great thing that I'd hoped for, but hey, at least something hateful and stupid is getting banned.
right, yeah.
That's good. I see something that I think is a circle back. Are we going back to Ron DeSantis, or is this a repeat?
This is just the article where basically he said that the "Don't Say Gay" bill, which would remove the encouragement of LGBTQ issues. This is what he said. When you actually look at the bill and it says no sexual instruction to kids pre-K through 3, how many parents want their kids to have transgenderism or something injected into classroom discussion? It's basically saying for our younger students, do you really want them being taught about sex? And this is any sexual stuff. But I think clearly right now we see a focus on transgenderism, telling kids that they may be able to pick genders and all of that.
That sounds a little bit early to me to be discussing all of it as well in schools. Is that common, pre-K to 3-year-olds being taught sex ed?
Okay, let me kind of take this one step back and look at the bigger picture. They do not want any conversation that would normalize in any way LGBTQ plus people. So if there is a book in the library where daddy and daddy take little Sam out to the park, then that is promoting LGBTQ. That is promoting sexual orientation and gender identity. So that book, read to a kindergarten or first grade class, is injecting sexual orientation and gender identity conversation into the classroom.
Okay. We mentioned the worst person on the planet a little bit ago. Let's go and jump into an article about her. Apparently, Marjorie, or
Where are you? Oh,
I'm
yeah.
nowhere.
I think you read that one wrong, sweetie.
I'm nowhere. Let's read the article headline and see. Majority of teachers have trans pupils and are crying out for help to support them, a study finds. So this sounds a little contrary to a lot of the narrative that we've been hearing today from our articles.
Well, this is in England, and 6,394 teachers across England were surveyed. 87% of secondary school teachers stated they had at least one trans student. And the teachers in England want the right resources to support them because they are dealing with this in such a way they don't have anything to work with. And now in England, because of the anti-transgender rhetoric there, they are still pushing to remove any resources for teachers to support their students. And I think we're going to find the same thing here. The moment we stop allowing resources to speak to the needs and the concerns of the kids that are in the classroom, teachers are basically going to say, no, we've got to have this stuff.
Family Values Republican drops re-election bid after raunchy texts reveal extramarital affair. Oh, wow, what a shocker. One of these anti-trans and just like anti-LGBT Republicans is not all above board. What's going on here, Jeannie?
So this is the fun part. He's a Texan. Representative Van Taylor was married. I don't know the disposition of that marriage at this moment, and has 3 daughters. Keep note of that. He was running for re-election, but decided that maybe he didn't need to do that when some sext texting was released publicly. Now, if you stop and you consider all of the information that we've shared with you so far, this is a Republican, family values, Texan. The person with which he was having the extramarital affair was Tanya Joya, the widow of an Islamic State fighter. So, if you don't know what that means, she was the bride of somebody from ISIS.
Oh, this just keeps getting better. It keeps getting better. I love it.
Family values representative was having an extramarital affair with the widow of an ISIS soldier.
Oh, I can see the movie now, The Terrorist's Wife, you know.
And this is where it just gets fun.
Okay.
So, Joya had contacted Taylor for assistance with a preventing violent extremism program. A year later, they were romantically involved. She said, he considered me his girlfriend. He labeled me his girlfriend, his mistress. I told him that I found him attractive. After that, for an entire month, every day during October of 2020, he wouldn't stop messaging me like crazy. It was just so distracting. He was going crazy for it. And then in June of 2021, Taylor reportedly paid her $5,000 to delete messages.
Yay, I love this article. I love this so much. Keep going, please.
This is
Oh, yay.
so, Carrie, here's the thing. I don't know that she was pumping him for state secrets. But I'm guessing she at least validated his parking.
That's a good one, Kari. That's very good pun. I love it. That is awesome. Thank you for that. Wow, this was a fun article. I really enjoyed that. Is there anything more that we can mine out of this that's more utter
No,
hilarity and
we need to move right along.
Okay. I have a blank page here. What the heck happened? Let's wait for this article to load and then we'll try it again. I don't know why I got a completely black screen there. Tories urged to show LGBT plus Ukrainians kindness by scrapping degrading borders bill. What's going on here?
So we've addressed that when the Russians invaded Ukraine, that the name of many LGBT plus advocates and leaders within Ukraine were on a hit list, a targeted list for Russian sanctioned kidnapping, person taking, and elimination. And so, of course, people are trying to leave the country. But the thing is that the borders had a very undignified way of keeping some people out of the country. And the Home Office, British government, refuses 4 out of 5 LGBT claims for asylum. So, there's a lot of concerns that LGBTQI plus Ukrainians are going to become refugees, much like those in Syria and other areas of the Middle East, with nowhere to go. So there's now a cry for the British government to relax some of those restrictions, to be able to allow for people from Ukraine to be able to find some safety and sanctuary within the UK.
It gets really tough though, because then I don't know. They've shown their cards so much. It's like, how do you go there as an LGBT person and feel safe and supported? I guess it's like so many of the other things, right? It's the people. It's what the people actually do, not the government. But again, these governments have the power to sway so much of the overall public opinion against somebody that they make it a dangerous place, and that's really unfortunate.
Yeah. And it is. But the question is it worth the risk? And we're actually going to talk about that tonight in one of our memoriams.
Let's jump back to Biden really quick. 5 steps Biden administration promises to take to protect trans kids.
Yes. So Biden's Health and Human Services Secretary Xavier Becerra has announced some different ways in which the Department of Health and Human Services is going to support trans kids. It's going to be, it's going to go out there and it's going to provide 4 different means of relieving them. HHS is releasing guidance to state child welfare agencies, making clear that states should use these agencies to advance safety and support for LGBTQ plus youth, including access to gender-affirming care. Also, HHS is releasing guidance on patient privacy, clarifying that despite the Texas government's threat, healthcare providers are not required to disclose private patient information related to gender affirming care. HHS has issued guidance making clear that denials of health care based on gender identity are illegal, as is restricting doctors and healthcare providers from providing care because of gender identity. HHS has been called on to explore all options to protect children and their parents, caretakers, and family. And finally, HHS will ensure that families and healthcare providers in Texas are aware of all the resources available to them if they face discrimination as a result of Abbott's order. These include an online portal to file a complaint with the Health and Human Services Office of Civil Rights.
Well, that's good. That's good to hear. That sounds like a really nice bit of advocacy there, high in the administration. That is
Yeah.
a former California political person, Javier Becerra, but you were super close. And yeah, it's good to see that. Those are some good things. So I'm happy about that. Let's jump over to something that makes me very happy. Talking about a very vocal heir to the Disney family. Disney Air calls out company silence on anti-LGBT Florida bill, and this is what is her name? I'm not finding it. Go ahead and jump in, Jeannie. I think this is the Abigail Disney. I think this is the same person I'm thinking of. I'll add a little color to this once you've gotten through the article.
Okay, well, let me first give you a trigger warning. This is not going to be a magical story. You and I are going to have some deep issues of conscience when I finish this story, so just be prepared. So Abigail Disney is a filmmaker and part of the Disney legacy. She is calling out the Disney company because Disney in the state of Florida has financially supported those individuals who have pushed the Don't Say Gay bill. Those who have authored it, those who are bringing it into the different committees and those type of things. Disney has financially supported those politicians. And even though Bob Iger came out and basically said, Disney, you need to do better, and called specifically on current CEO Bob Chapek to do better, they have still not made any kind of denouncement of the LGBT, the Don't Say Gay bill. Now, this goes one step further because the Disney company released a statement that quite hurts me as a fan of Disney for all of these years. Disney issued a statement that says partly the following: we understand how important this issue is to our LGBTQ plus employees and many others. For nearly a century, Disney has been a unifying force that brings people together. We are determined that it remains a place where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. The biggest impact we can have in creating a more inclusive world is through the inspiring content we produce, the welcoming culture we create here, and the diverse community organizations we support, including those representing the LGBTQ plus community. For me, they stepped way around the wrong that they did. Disney is financially supporting those politicians who are creating a hostile environment in schools for LGBTQ plus kids. Disney is supposed to be concerned with the well-being and the happiness of all ages. But they said here that if we are going to do anything for the LGBTQ plus community, it can only be done by the content that we produce. Have y'all noticed the recent Yahoo that Disney is receiving for LGBTQ plus representation? These little bitty nuggets of representation on screen, these little bitty glimpses of LGBTQ plus inclusion, but we've not yet seen a full LGBTQ plus statement in that content that says this is who we support.
Mm-hmm.
They are also saying that they can only impact the world through creating a welcoming culture at Disney for their employees and for their guests who come to their properties. Except there right now reports from employees is that employee satisfaction is at an all-time low across the board, and that Disney is doing more to harm their employees than produce a welcoming culture there for them. And then finally, they said the biggest impact that they can have is through supporting diverse community organizations who support the LGBTQ plus community. So basically providing financial donations to organizations that are already working with LGBTQ plus, but then also turning around and supporting those politicians who are actively creating an anti-trans climate in the state. So this is not a black eye. This is Disney having fallen down 14 flights of stairs, run over by a dump truck, and then picked up by some strange, straggly, mange-covered dog and buried in the middle of a toxic dump.
No over dramatization there. I love it.
No.
Yeah, and this my first entree into finding out who Abigail Disney was is she went to I believe it was she went to Disneyland, and basically was asking the workers there you know, how they're doing. Oh, actually no, one of the workers actually slipped her a note saying you need to help us. And she investigated and found this kind of pattern that you're talking about there, with employee satisfaction being in the toilet right now. Oh, yeah. Because they're having a lot of wage issues and stuff like that. They're just not taking care of their people the way that her great granduncle, I think it is, saw when he created the place. So a lot of Walt's initial vision is kind of being lost. I'm sure if we had Walt in charge, there would still be a lot of problems, because he was neither saintly nor perfect nor particularly clean. But it's just great to see someone with the right name out there making a big stink about their missteps. I do appreciate that.
And I think Disney, needs to be held accountable. You have not only Abigail, but you also have Bob Iger, former CEO, well-loved among the Disney community, comparatively speaking. I mean, when it comes to the Disney community and the respect for CEOs, there's a dodgy past. Bob Chapek has already proven that Bob Iger was a shining example in comparison.
Well, yeah, and I just hate that Disney has come out and actually stated that they will not stop funding the Don't Say Gay sponsors.
Yeah,
that's unfortunate. I'm clicking through the articles and I'm still seeing a lot of Florida. Oh, we're getting back to the pride flag kid. Let's see, where are we at now?
Yeah, that can be deleted.
Yeah. Are we gonna move into some country music here?
Yes.
All right. Country music star John Rich testifies before Tennessee House Criminal Justice Committee on pornographic material in schools. What's going on here, Gene?
So John Rich is part of the country music duo or group or whatever it is, Big and Rich. And as a Nashvilleian, he came before the Tennessee House Criminal Justice Subcommittee to testify regarding pornographic and obscene material in Tennessee schools K through 12. So House Bill 1944 creates a process to deal with these pornographic and obscene materials that get into school. It would remove the exemption that exists from possession of obscene or pornographic material, creates a process so that if a complaint is made, that the books are not arbitrarily removed. Now, these are, this is all about changing this so that we get this stuff out of the hands. He says there are good people in our legislature on both sides of the aisle who want to fix the problem of our children being exposed to obscene and pornographic material at school. However, some have argued that this material is approved because it falls into the definition of education in their opinion. I will prove to you today how that statement is false. We are here today because our rogue schools, teachers, and school boards that are allowing our children to be exposed to materials that assault their innocence and conscience every day, even at this very minute. Not only is it repugnant and evil to expose our kids to graphic sexual images and narratives, it also happens to be illegal on a state and federal level. Today, I'm going to focus on just one of the reasons why it has been deemed to be illegal to expose kids to these materials. The reason is an official and legally recognized term used to define the tactics of child predators when they are in pursuit of a child, and it is known as grooming. He goes on to talk about how grooming is defined. But this is where his point really comes home. What's the difference between a teacher or an educator or a librarian putting one of these books on the desk of a student and a guy in a white van pulling up at the edge of the school when the school lets out and says, "Come on around, kids, let me read you this book and show you these pictures"? What's the difference in those two scenarios? There is a difference, by the way. They can run away from the guy in the white van. So, intellectual superstar John Rich, country music star John Rich, stood before the Tennessee Criminal Justice Subcommittee and said that school teachers who use questionable material are essentially the same as groomers and potential pedophiles.
Because there's no checks when people sign up to be teachers. They just kind of allow anybody in, so it's just a free for all there.
It's not a matter. Yeah, they have to have those checks, but you see, the thing is that they instantly and immediately become a groomer if they use one of these challenged books in their classroom.
Again, it's really thin, tough logic.
If they never used those books in the past, then there would be no record of them being a groomer. They only become the groomer when they, use the book.
I just the crazy thin logic and argument is oof. That's next level. Oh, please God, let's not go back to Texas again. What's going on here?
This is horrendous, but it's also it's something that Texas has already done once.
Mm-hmm.
We reported back in October that Texas removed the link to the Trevor Project from the website of the I want to say, yeah, back then it was the website of Family and Protective Services. This time they removed the Trevor Project link from the Department of Health and Human Services in Texas. So this is twice now that Texas has removed information regarding the Trevor Project from their official information pages that are provided for youth, in particular for LGBTQ youth looking for resources.
That guy just looks creepy. I mean, it just screams creep. My God. Are we're going back to Idaho again?
Yeah. Idaho's not only just trying to mess over trans kids.
Well, I guess if they're spreading it around, then the Idaho Senate passes a bill that would bar abortion after about 6 weeks. I'm assuming that's well before the third trimester, which was the previous standard for viability of life. What's going on here,
Yeah.
Jeannie?
Um, this is the second time Idaho has tried to pass this. It is right as it says. It's an abortion ban that would prohibit any abortions after a 6-week pregnancy. And at that point, there are a lot of women who do not even know that they are pregnant. So it's not an adequate threshold of understanding, first of all, a viable pregnancy, much less a known pregnancy. But this is where this one goes one step further. It has a trigger clause that says that this law will only become a law if a federal appeals court rules in favor of a similar piece of legislation in another state. So basically, we've said this before. The abortion issues that are going on in states right now are intricately linked with the anti-LGBTQ issues that are being raised. These are coming from the exact same source. It is the exact same groups who are making both of these pushes. And this is why states are being covered in similar language bills in both abortion and with anti-trans issues.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Is this our first domino law where this law would go into effect if it was passed in another state? That's
It
something
may
I hadn't
be.
heard of before.
I don't recall any that we've talked about.
Mm-mm. It's very interesting. And yeah, I think that's what they're trying to do is they're trying to set up these dominoes in advance so that they can
Yeah.
knock one over and get the rest to fall in
Oh,
quick
yeah,
step
absolutely.
behind it.
Absolutely.
All right, got about 20 minutes left. Let's see if we can kind of crank through the last five and
Yep.
open the floor a little bit. South Carolina lawmakers halt abortion and conversion therapy bills by walking out. This seems
Yeah.
very adult. What's going on here, Jeannie?
So actually, this is a good thing. The Senate Medical Affairs Committee in South Carolina was meeting to review some bills that were coming up that had to do with anti-abortion and pro-conversion therapy. Two members walked out. And by walking out, they took the number of required attendees below the threshold for a quorum. And so they couldn't vote on these bills. So what they did is they used the ability of maneuvering the rules to provide them the action that they could take to keep these horrific bills from moving forward.
That's very good. I like that. That
Yeah.
that shows some good gumption there. I love that.
Yep.
Shall we move into some sports now?
We sure can try.
Okay. Trans swimmer Leah Thomas has a simple answer for anybody questioning her right to compete. What is she bringing forth as the answer here in these situations?
So Leah Thomas is gaining a lot of attention right now. A University of Pennsylvania swim team member has been targeted by transphobic and anti-trans rhetoric for a long time now. She has not really been out in front of the press. She's not really pushed for, saying things or creating issues. She talked about her journey a little bit. She said that, she came out to her family who were loving and supportive, but continued swimming on the team with men up until 2020, the Olympic trials of 2020. She said, then, and this is in Sports Illustrated, I was very depressed. I got to the point where I couldn't go to school. I was missing classes. My sleep schedule was messed up. I knew that at that moment, I needed to do something to address this. So Thomas began hormone therapy in 2019 and began to immediately improve mentally, healthily, in healthy ways. So basically, she has been repeatedly called a man on a women's team. And so she basically came back and she says, there's a very simple answer to the critique that I'm a man. She said, I'm a woman, so I belong on the women's team. Trans people deserve that same respect every other athlete gets. So, I mean, she's not going to, debate with them. She's going to state who they are. And I think that's one tactic that we have to take into account. Just be who we are.
It's nice to see that little footnote under the subsection of it that she might one day be an Olympic civil rights lawyer for other potential Olympians. I love that.
That would be cool.
Yeah. Okay. Now we get into the memoriam section. It gets a little bit tough here at the end as we talk about some of these. Selfless trans man killed in hit and run while walking home from work. What's going on in this article, Jeannie?
Matthew Spampinato was walking home from his job at Starbucks, and he was walking along State Route 237 when he was hit by a vehicle that led to his death, but the vehicle fled. No one knows what the vehicle was. No one saw the driver. And basically this beautiful young trans man will probably never get justice because they don't even have a lead on what kind of vehicle or who the driver might be.
Is there any indication in this or anything that you heard in follow-up that this is looked at as a hate crime?
No, nothing yet. It cannot be presumed and it cannot be ruled out, but at the moment it is just a hit and run. It is being treated as a hit and run, so all of the resources are just going toward identifying who perpetrated this.
And in our last story, we hit another one, another tragic occurrence here. A transgender woman murdered in Houston who had actually fled gender violence in Latin America.
Yeah. 29-year-old immigrant Paloma Vasquez was not identified in initial reports. We mentioned it, I think. Well, we had it in the mention list. I don't know that we ever got to it. She was found dead in her apartment just days before Gregory Abbott's mandate was issued. But Ms. Vasquez had only been in the U.S. for 6 months. She had fled Latin America because of the danger there. And the comment that I made earlier this evening when we were talking about the Ukrainian LGBTQ plus people trying to get sanctuary in the UK, you'd ask a question about that, and I'm like, sometimes the risk has to be weighed. The risk of staying in Ukraine is the chance that you will be killed.
Absolutely.
But now we have a case of someone who could not escape that fate. And it's a triple tragedy that she had to experience that fear in her home region, that she had to come into a country where she was not welcomed as an immigrant nor as a transgender woman. And finally, she was killed. She risked a lot, and it's very tragic.
Yeah. Why is it important for us to bring these up, as sad and sobering as these articles might be?
Every one of these people that we list in memorial, they are our family. They are a part of our connection together. They're our siblings. And one of the principal concepts of the Transverse was letting people know that they're not alone. As we talk about people around the world, we have to remind each other that we are not alone. We have to remind each other in life, and we have to remind each other in death. We have to let each other know that we are going to be remembered when we're gone. Because in so many ways, we are not thought about while we're alive, whether it's family or it's our employers or it is society at large or it's politicians or it's churches. We're not thought about while we're alive, but we have to remember that we are not alone in life nor in death.
Very
And I
beautifully
saw
put.
asking about Marla
Yes, yes.
over the weekend. I mean, it goes back to what I was talking about, the anxiety that I was experiencing tonight. Marla, along with many of us in trans TikTok community, heard the news that Milo Winslow, a trans male and advocate in Lincoln, Nebraska, had taken his own life as the result of bullying and cyber attacks that he experienced for fighting for transgender rights in the city of Lincoln in Nebraska. This devastated Marla. And part of that is she's still trying to recover from that. The thing is that we can't, because many of us, even though I did not know Milo and I'm not participating in the events, Milo's family is in charge of the official funeral, and Milo is being refused the right to be named appropriately and gendered appropriately. His family continues to dead name him. His family continues to misgender him. And there are plans, if it wasn't today, it's coming up, for a memorial service for the trans community to be able to honor and remember and celebrate Milo, because that is who he is, and he deserves to be remembered.
That's beautiful to hear. I'm sorry for your loss. I was able to find in the quick second there and bring up a Journal, Lincoln Journal Star article about Milo. Um, they have pictures of Milo. They use Milo's name, and they talk about how the Lincoln loses a voice for the transgender community. It pays what it seems like a great deal of respect to Milo. This is where it gets really difficult.
Mhm.
I feel very differently about the idiots and assholes out there creating legislation against us than I do
Mhm.
about the people who are supposed to have our backs no matter what, our families, um, and our loved ones, the ones that are supposed to be there for us. And when you don't have that support, it's really surprisingly easy to fall into that pattern of thinking of hopelessness.
Yeah.
And that's the part of this that really gets to me of all of tonight. um, that even at this point and what we've lost, the family is still so stubbornly and idiotically sticking to this ridiculous way of thinking about their child who and their family member who was a great advocate and voice for the LGBT community, and obviously particularly for us in the trans community. That's the part that gets me.
Yeah.
Um,
It's tough.
yeah,
And Milo, again, is our family.
yes.
And so we take the opportunity to honor him.
Well, I'm very glad we were able to do that. I'm so sorry for your loss and for how hard it hit you and all of your close friends on TikTok. My heart.
For me, Milo's death is part of our family experience. What hit me the hardest was, since I wasn't close or connected to Milo in any way, his death, while tragic, didn't hit me as hard as finding out the circumstances leading to his death and finding out who was responsible for the circumstances leading to his death. And that has enraged me to a point that it drains my energy on a regular basis. This was not a case of a mentally ill person taking their own life. This was a case of intentional creation of a hostile environment that led to cyberbullying and online attacks. There is one group of people that is responsible for that. That is the Nebraska Family Alliance. The Nebraska Family Alliance is a Christian based political action group supposedly trying to defend the rights of families. They sponsored a petition in the Lincoln City council that rescinded the passing of a measure that would allow for transgender people to have equal access. The petition needed just over 4,000 votes, or 4,000 signatures. They ended up with over 18,000 signatures, 4 times what they needed. This was not the citizens of Lincoln who did this. This was the Nebraska Family Alliance. It was an intentional effort to create a hostile environment for transgender people. Period. Full stop. They are accountable.
I look forward to following up on this and finding what ways we can make their life hell.
Yeah. We need to.
Mm-hmm. Jeannie, thank you. Oh, go ahead.
Let's do to these places what Christians are doing to abortion clinics. Let's stand out in front of these organizations with signs that say, "You're killing our children. You're killing our family." Let's stand in front of these, and anytime anyone comes in or out of those buildings, we get in their face and we let them know that they are responsible for the death of people who have choices, but they refuse to allow them to live them. That's what we need to do.
Agreed. Well, Jeannie, thank you very much for being open and sharing that, and giving us some good advice on what we can do to actually fight it back against these people. I feel it was I know it was very difficult for you tonight to come on the show. I feel it was very brave. And again, like you said in the opening, it's very important for us to keep doing this work and to get the word out there, if for no other reason than the remembrances, so that we can keep the lives of those people going, keep their names in their memory, and make sure that their lives weren't in vain. I really appreciate that. With that, I think the Transverse is going to be done for the night. Jeannie will not be doing an episode of Behind Open Doors tonight. Gonna give her the time off to go and grieve and deal with all of the emotion from this weekend and tonight even. So we love you, and we will see you very soon. Tomorrow is our usual Tuesday lineup. We've got Keep Living starting at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 Eastern, followed by the Transgender Show with me. I'll be interviewing Kaylee Hargrove. Kaylee is a pastor, a trans pastor, who was kicked out of her seminary for being trans. She is now in the middle of a lawsuit fighting against the Title IX exemptions that religious schools are able to use to discriminate against LGBT students while still gaining federal funding. So that's very important work, and I can't wait to talk to her about that tomorrow. So tune in for that. Sure to be a great interview. Thank you all so much. Have a great night.